Hello, welcome to Solar Oregon's Comparing Solar Quotes webinar. My name is Nicole, and I'm a program manager at the nonprofit Solar Oregon. This is a reoccurring workshop, and Solar Oregon has been delivering workshops like this one to home and business owners across Oregon for years. We work to provide you as the consumer with information that you need to make good, informed choices as you explore solar and home battery storage. So thank you all for joining us today. Today, we're going to build off the basics of our How to Go Solar and Storage workshop. And if you haven't seen that yet, we do have recordings on our YouTube page that you can check out. Today, we're really going to be looking more closely at comparing solar quotes. We'll still look at the fundamentals in a system and the components that are part of a solar system and how you can see these represented on a quote. We'll look at different elements in a quote and key details that you can look out for. We'll walk through an example and we'll wrap up with talking about contractor selection if you haven't already received quotes. We'll have time after the presentation for a Q&A session. So if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. We'll be using the chat as a place to put helpful resources. So I'm going to go ahead and put some of those resource links there now. We'll also send out these resource links with the recording after we complete today's session. So that usually comes out a few days after. And with that, we'll get started. We love to know where folks are joining from today so that we can learn more about where our education is reaching. So I'll start a poll just to see where in the state you might be joining in from. Great, thanks for sharing that. We also have a demographics poll to see who is joining our educational workshops. This is optional, so you don't have to complete it if you don't want to. Great. And then we will still touch on current incentives for solar and storage, just in case you may not have attended our How to Go Solar and Storage workshop. And so we're just curious what your familiarity is with current Energy Trust incentives. Great. And it sounds like a few folks aren't familiar with incentives, so we will touch on those lightly. If you would like to learn more about it, feel free to check out our past webinars, but we will just talk about the basics for those today here in this workshop as well. Well, thank you for sharing more about who you are. With that, let's get right started. So just a little background about Solar Oregon. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that has worked to encourage solar and storage adoption throughout Oregon since 1979. We do this by providing reliable and impartial consumer education. So we do workshops like this. We also have solar tours, and we have different showcases and panel discussions around solar and storage. As we go through this presentation, again, feel free to put any questions you may have in the chat. This workshop is supported by Energy Trust of Oregon. Energy Trust is an independent nonprofit that was established in 2002 that provides resources to the customers of investor-owned utilities in our state to use energy more efficiently, as well as to gain access to renewable energy. They offer key incentives for solar installation and battery storage. So we'll just share those here. later in the presentation. And Energy Trust also coordinates a network of trade ally contractors. And so if you haven't gotten a quote yet, or if you're looking to get additional quotes, because we do recommend getting at least 3 quotes so that you can compare your options. Since solar is highly customizable and modular, the quotes you get from one solar contractor could look very different from the quote that you would get from another solar contractor. So we do recommend getting at least 3. So if you still need to get quotes, Energy Trust has a solar bid tool that connects you to the solar trade allies in your area. And these trade allies are qualified, they've been rigorously vetted. They also are approved to offer the Energy Trust incentives, and they're familiar with the Energy Trust design and installation requirements. So that link is in the chat as well. We put that there. If you still need to get quotes, you can go to that solar bid tool. And there's also a QR code on the screen here. So with that, we're going to jump into system fundamentals and look at components in a system. This diagram is of a typical grid-tied system. And what is key here to know is that your PV panels are going to connect to or solar panels, sometimes also called photovoltaic panels, are going to be connected to a special component called an inverter or microinverter. And that's going to convert the voltage of electricity to the type of electricity that is used by a home. When you're a grid-tied system, you also get a special utility meter installed that is bidirectional so that you can export energy out to the grid and also pull energy from the grid. So that is different than if you're an off-grid system. Net metering is a special arrangement that allows you to get credits for the energy that you export to the grid. So anything that you don't use in your home when you are a grid-tied system would then flow back out to the grid where it can be used by other customers. And net metering for PGE and Pacific Power right now is currently 1-to-1. And so if you're with a different utility, that's going to vary depending on what type of net metering rate they have. So that's something you could check with your utility provider. The way that net metering works is it starts in April so that you can build up more credits in the sunny summer months and be able to use those banked credits in the more cloudy, rainy winter months. And because you're grid tied, again, you can still pull electricity from the grid. And it's important to know that the credits roll over month to month, but not year to year. So anything you don't use after the full net metering year would be donated to low-income customers. And in our How to Go Solar and Storage workshop, we do go through an example energy bill. So feel free to check out those recordings on our YouTube if you want to learn a little bit more about net metering in that process. So as we shared, solar is highly customizable and modular. What your system design is going to be based on how much energy you use, what type of space you have available, what your budget is, maybe other goals you have for your system, as well as other constraints. The average system size is about 8 kilowatts, which is abbreviated KW. And when you're looking at these different quotes, they'll probably be different sizes. So for your solar system, and that oftentimes have different equipment, which means the panels could have different capacities. So panel capacity, one panel could be anywhere from 250 watts to 450 watts. It ranges depending on the specific panel. And then however many panels you have would be based on the design of your system and also what space you have available. So if you don't have an area where you're getting a lot of sunlight, there might not be as many panels that you can put up. And we go into that further in our How to Go Solar and Storage workshop. But as you're comparing these quotes, you can look at the number of watts in your system. So for that average that we shared of an 8 kW system, that would be 8,000 watts. And sometimes people will be like, okay, what's your price per watt? So you would calculate your price per watt by dividing your total cost by the watt capacity. So for example, if you did an 8 kilowatt system and your cost for that system was $32,000, you would divide the $32,000 by 8,000 to get your price per watt. The price per watt in our state ranges from $2.6 per watt to $4+ a watt. It's just really going to depend. And there are other factors you should consider. It doesn't all just come down to price per watt. We'll talk about later the process of selecting a contractor and what things are important to you and ways you can find reputable contractors. So that is also important because you might get a cheaper price from maybe an installer who has less experience or just doesn't have the same business standards that you are looking for. So we'll talk about that later in the presentation. Because solar is so customizable and the systems vary based on the site where the panels are installed and depending on what you are trying to achieve with your system, do you have solar paired with home battery storage? There are many reasons that costs can vary when you're comparing these quotes. So the size, obviously, the design. If you need any roofing or electrical upgrades, that could also impact your cost. If you're in an older home and your rafters are spaced further apart and they don't meet current codes, there might need to be additional supports that are added before the solar can be installed. Or if you have an electrical panel that has a lower capacity or is older, that might need to be replaced before going solar. If you pair home battery storage with your solar, that impacts the cost. If you install both of those together, usually the design is meant to incorporate that specific equipment and battery. If you are doing more of a phased approach where you have existing solar and you're looking to add to it, there might be things that need to be adjusted, swapped out in order to incorporate new equipment. So that is something that can impact your cost as well. Obviously, access to incentives and incentives can help reduce that out-of-pocket cost, that initial cost is going to make the cost vary as you're looking at different quotes, as well as connecting to the grid. You also have to interconnect. So there is an application process for interconnection, and that can look different depending on where your home is located, who is your utility, are you located by a feeder, and how that application process works is that you work through that with your installer and the utility. So that can also impact the cost of the system. So keeping those in mind as you are reviewing quotes is very helpful. Now we'll look at elements in a quote. When reviewing your quote, you're going to see that there is equipment included as part of the quote. So looking at what is being included in your quote as far as does it have solar pairing it with storage, whereas this quote is only just the solar portion. Are there specific adders that are included in the quote? What are the warranties that are listed on the quote? There's usually two types of warranties. One is a manufacturer equipment warranty that's for specific pieces of equipment, and the other one is going to be a workmanship warranty. The standard for that in the industry is to have at least 2 years of workmanship warranty. So understanding what warranties are included, how long they're for, what they cover is also going to help you really compare apples to apples when looking at these different quotes. And sometimes maintenance is included in the quote depending on the solar installer. So checking to see if there is any kind of maintenance, what does maintenance look like? If you do need to do maintenance with the installer, what would those costs be? So you get the full picture is really helpful. A big difference can also come down to what technology is in your system. So what brands are being used? Is it newer technology? For example, if you're installing standard solar panels, which is the ones we commonly see, that's a roof with racking, and then you have the panel installed on the racking. There's also solar roof tiles, which are roofing material as well as solar panels. And those are more expensive as they're a newer technology. So understanding what technology is included can help you look at those costs more closely, as well as, are there microinverters or is it just a string inverter? Both do work well. It just depends on the needs of your system, and sometimes specific brands either use microinverters or string inverters, depends. And is there DC optimizers? What other technology is there? Are you getting a smart electric panel as part of the quote? Or are there any structural upgrades that are included? Some of the adders you might see in a quote would be home battery storage if you're pairing that solar with battery. If you're getting a new EV charger, those electrical upgrades such as installing an additional panel, a new panel, or a smart electrical panel. And then also if you're re-roofing, sometimes also you might see a critter guard. So that's used to keep, squirrels from getting under the panels and getting into the wires. So looking at some of those additional adders will also help narrow down what is actually part of the cost of the quote. And we talked a little bit about warranties, the two types. So there's a manufacturer equipment warranty and also workmanship warranty. So really understanding what they cover is helpful. Energy Trust Trade Allies usually provide at least 2 years of a system's warranty. With Solar Within Reach, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is the income qualified incentive program, there is also a bit of an extended workmanship warranty for eligible projects. So it can really vary depending on your home and your system. So understanding what you're getting for the quote before you sign is just going to make a smoother process overall. And this is an example of what you might see on a quote. So you can see there's the equipment, what manufactured that equipment, what size things are, like the capacity, for example. You can also see the materials warranty. And in this one, they had also EV charging as well. And then when you are looking to go solar, before you sign, you should really understand the financing aspect of solar. If you're paying in cash, if you're getting a loan, really understanding that since it is a large upfront cost. So with any major financial decision, you can consult a professional for that. And if you have questions, asking your trade ally before you sign is going to just make sure that your expectations and what is being provided are aligned before you move forward with the contract. Looking at the payment structure, if you are not paying all up front, if there's financing or contracts, and understanding the timelines for any of that financing and timelines for payments being made is very helpful. Financing is very common, and there are loans that are tailored specifically to solar. You may wish to ask your current bank or credit union who you already have a relationship with if they have any loans tailored to solar. And installers may also have a financing partner. So loans, you want to make sure that you understand the loan structure. Leases can sometimes have an annual escalator, so that's really important to understand, or there might be additional fees. So looking into that, so you know what bills you're going to be getting throughout the year is going to help you understand the total cost. And then another type of lease structure is a power purchase agreement. So both with leases and power purchase agreements, you wouldn't actually own the equipment. The installer would own it, and you're basically buying the power from them from that system. And sometimes, for example, leases might have a different number of years that they're valid for. So sometimes it's like 6 years the lease is valid for. Sometimes it's a long-term lease. So you want to make sure to look at that and just really understand the timeline. And power purchase agreements weren't historically very common in Oregon, but they are becoming more common. And there's also obviously incentives and credits. So those can also help you too. For the energy trust incentives, those currently are not eligible if you're leasing or doing a power purchase agreement. So that is also something to keep in mind. Energy Trust also launched a smart e-loan in partnership with Solar Trade Allies and Inclusive Property Capital. And so this is another option if you're looking at a loan. They have solar financing for home ownership or for homeowners, and it's no fee or prepayment penalties. And so you can use that QR code or the links in the chat to learn more about that financing option. And then some things to ask yourself as you go through reviewing a loan is the interest rate fixed or variable? What is the interest rate? Are there dealer fees or early payment penalties? Is refinancing an option? And also is helpful to know who services the loan. So here are the Energy Trust standard incentives for solar and home battery storage. And they do vary depending on your utility. So you can see what the incentive is for Portland General Electric as well as for Pacific Power. And it's really important to know that incentives are going to vary based on your utility provider. So if you have a different utility, you would want to check with them to see if they have incentives available and what those look like. And then something to keep in mind is, although these are the incentives currently, that doesn't mean that these incentives will stay in place forever. So incentive offers are subject to funding and availability and can change. And they're also impacted by policy. So if you are interested in going solar, or already have quotes are a helpful way to get a benchmark to see if like the incentives that exist now work for you, because we just don't know how long those incentives will be available. Energy Trust also has an income qualified incentive available where you can get additional incentives. And so these Energy Trust incentives, both the standard and income qualified one, do impact your out-of-pocket cost. You do have to work with a trade ally contractor in order to be eligible for these incentives, as well as be either a PGE or Pacific Power customer. All right, so digging further into quotes. So there are two different examples of on the screen here of cost breakdown, and you can see where they're estimating what size system the customer will need. And so you might see that vary across the different quotes. So as we shared earlier, kW is kilowatts, and so often you'll see the system size listed out in kW. And then there'll also be an estimate for your annual production. And this usually comes from the discussion you have with your solar contractor, you know, sharing what your energy consumption is, and looking at your previous bills, as well as what they see in their software for solar resource. So to make electricity from the sun, you have to have sun hitting your panels. And so with that, and the conversation you have about what your consumption is and what your future needs are, they'll include a production estimate for your system. Looking at the total cost breakdown in your quote, that could be represented in different ways. Sometimes the incentives will be included in the cost breakdown. Sometimes it won't. So understanding what the quote is showing you, does it have an outdated incentive? For example, the tax credit is, if you're just getting a traditional system, consumers can't access that tax credit. There are loans and leases where the installer can pass on the commercial tax credit to you, but looking and understanding what incentives are currently available and if they've included it in their total cost breakdown is going to help when you compare that total cost. Materials, you'll get to see, what brands are being suggested for your system, whether it's an inverter or microinverters, and that is helpful. If you're wanting a specific brand for a piece of equipment, you might need to check with multiple contractors, as some contractors will specialize with specific brands. And when you are looking at financing, if that's included on your quote, understanding what type of financing it is. Is it a loan? And is the loan through a third party, through the installer? Was it a lease or is it a PPA, a power purchase agreement? And looking at those pieces so that you can understand if they've included financing in your quote or not. And once you have your quotes, like again, we recommend getting at least 3. And if you're in the Willamette Valley or in Portland, there are enough contractors to get at least 3 quotes. If you're in a more rural part of the state or area, or if you're on the coast, it can be more challenging to get 3 quotes, but we definitely recommend that you get that so you can see the different designs and proposals for your specific home and needs and compare those before moving forward with one. Once you do have a quote that you're ready to move forward with, and you've asked your questions to the solar installer and make sure you understand what you're signing, you would proceed with that contract and sign it. If you're trying to decide between contractors, company culture, the size of the company, years in business might come into play. Trade allies are often more locally based contractors, and so they're familiar with the design requirements, local jurisdictions for getting permitting for your system, and permitting times can vary depending on what jurisdiction you're in. So also considering some of the softer stuff about the company can help you narrow down your decision. There's also online reviews. You can look at those. You can look at testimonials. Maybe those are published on the website. You could also ask for references and talk to that solar contractor and ask if they have a recent customer they've installed on or a past customer who you could speak with. And usually they're happy to share. Credentials might also come into play. So we talked about the trade ally contractors. You do have to work with a trade ally contractor to access the Energy Trust incentives, but there might be other credentials you're looking at, such as a Better Business Bureau. Sometimes there's other certifications that are more about the company culture, such as like a B Corp. And so you can look at that if that is of interest to you as well. And this is just information about trade allies again, so they're familiar with those installation requirements. And you can use that link to the solar bid tool if you have not already gotten quotes from contractors or if you need additional quotes as well. But with that, that takes us right into our Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. I'm just going to put those helpful resources in the chat one last time. Again, those will be emailed out with the recording